Hello everyone. Welcome back to NeoLearn. Dear friends, let us discuss When You Are Old, written by William Butler Yeats. William Butler Yeats is an Irish poet and one of the greatest poets in the English language of the 20th century. He was awarded Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1923. He is one among the great love poets of the world. When You Are Old is comprised of three stanzas which containing four lines. The rhyme scheme is very distinctive and steady, while the work is relatively short like any Yeats poems. It is jam-packed with imagery and other poetic devices. The poem is the product of the early period in Yeats' poetic career. When You Are Old is a love poem addressed to the poet's beloved Maud Gonne, who was the most beautiful young lady of his time. She is believed to be the inspiration behind this poem. The tone of the poem is one of melancholy. William Butler Yeats imagines her future years and his true love in future. He repents over her divergent attitude who fails to understand his spiritual love. The poet begins the first stanza addressing her, imagining her to be in her old age. The lady will be very old, approaching her peaceful years. She then opens the book of poems penned by the poet. As she starts to read slowly, she is taken back in time to recollect her past when she had innocent looks in her eyes. The poet also says that his beloved would also regret how many loved her physical grace, but only the poet worshipped the pilgrim soul even as her face changed. At last, the lady will grieve over the loss of her true love fleeing from her and joining a crowd of stars very distant from her. Thus, the poet expresses his true intentions while his beloved fails to understand his true love. When You Are Old is a bittersweet poem that reveals the complexities of love. The poem is generally taken to be addressed to Maud Gonne, an Irish actress with whom Yeats was infatuated throughout his life. That is said, the poem can also be interpreted more broadly without specifying the names or genders of either the speaker or the addressee. In any case, the poem argues in favor of a kind of love based not on physical appearances but on the deeper beauty of the soul. In the first stanza, the speaker asks the addressee to think ahead to a time when she will be old, tired, and grey. Then, says the speaker, the addressee will look back nostalgically on her life to date, thinking of her youthful looks as though they were a dream. Those who loved the addressees are portrayed as superstitious and insincere. The speaker implies that the so called love of these men for the addressee will fade, just as the basis for that love will fade too. The speaker contrasts his own love for the addressee with the inferior love described above. The speaker's love, the poem argues, will stand the test of time because it is based on the addressee's pilgrim soul and the sorrows of her changing face. That is, the speaker perceives an inner restlessness of this woman's soul and implies that this will express itself in her changing face as she grows old. The speaker then claims to experience love that goes beyond the surface. The addressee's face may change over time, but the soul that the speaker loves will not. Furthermore, the pilgrim like quality of the addressee's soul might be the very reason why she seemed to have denied the speaker's love. It sounds like the addressee refuses to settle down. The poem expresses a complicated sentiment, then attesting the power of love as well as its limits. Indeed, there is a hint of bitterness in the way the speaker predicts that the poem itself be a reminder of how love fled from the addressee. But whatever the complexities, there is no doubting the speaker's strength of feeling, and through the poem, the reader is reminded that true love of the kind described is rarely simple, easy, or certain. And the poem indirectly tells that the external beauty is the reason for infatuation and love of many people, which made that lady to reject the true love of the poet, and that rejection created hatred within him. The speaker is suggesting that the poem itself will stand as a testament to the speaker's true form of love, when the shallow love of others is nothing but a distant memory. The poem has a very bleak outlook on aging, with the speaker suggesting to the addressee that life will grow sadder and lonelier as youthful beauty fades away. The speaker links the enjoyment of life to the addressee's youth, as the poem argues that the addressee should make the most of the younger years she has still has left. Through the speaker's words to the addressee, the poem argues that time passes by quicker than people realize, and that once youth is gone, it is truly irretrievable. The poem takes an imagined look into the future day to day existence of the addressee. It shows a picture that contrasts sharply with the vibrant and vivacious life that this woman seemed to have been living at the time of the poem's writing. Old age is depicted in the first stanza as a time of passivity. The addressee is falling asleep by the fire, grey haired and lacking energy. The speaker here implores her to take down this book, likely the collection of poems that holds this poem also, and read in order to be reminded of her former glories. In the second stanza, the speaker characterizes the addressee's youth in terms of how loved she is, suggesting that youth is a kind of attractive force that brings other people into its orbit. According to the speaker, people love the addressee's glad grace and beauty. But the poem then links again to sorrow, suggesting that the addressee's changing face over the years will reflect an internal sadness that comes with the loss of youth. In the third stanza, the loss of youth also seems to cut short any possibility of love. Love in this future scenario has fled from the addressee. Like youthful looks, love is a kind of present absence in the addressee's old age. With the above in mind, though the speaker is not exactly painting a rosy picture of the addressee's future, in essence, the speaker is predicting a lonely scene, one in which this woman has only a fire and a book for company. Indeed, the speaker predicts that it will be through reading this book the addressee will be reminded of her youth and ultimately her failure to embrace love when given the chance. Of course, this is all viewed through the perspective of the speaker. It is not necessarily true that the addressee will have to spend old age looking back nostalgically on her youth. But the poem seems to imply that this is likely given how the addressee's current life is governed by things that will vanish over time, which is beauty and youthful energy. All in all, when you are old, paints a pessimistic picture of old age, suggesting that it's a time of melancholic reflection, and regret, particularly for those who focused on shallow forms of love in their youth. It is up to the reader, of course, to decide whether this argument rings true, especially as a poem was written by a young man. When you are old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of the shadows deep. When you are old and grey and full of sleep. From this line, the reader can derive that he is writing this while his lover is still relatively young, but she should read this again when she is an old woman. The speaker has every specific instruction for his lover. Not only should she read the poem when she is old and grey and full of sleep, but also when she is nodding by the fire, according to the second line. In the third and fourth line, the speaker tells his former beloved to dream of the soft look, which means her eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. In conjunction with rereading the poem, the lover should also remember the beauty she once possessed. The poem begins with a restatement of its title, settling up what follows as direct communication between the speaker and an unnamed addressee. This addressee is usually taken to be Irish nationalist and actress Maud Gonne, but the poem works equally well with the more general interpretations. Regardless of the precise identities of the speaker and addressee, the poem feels intimate from the beginning, with the reader as an outside observer of a seemingly close relationship. When you are old, contrast two moments in time. The first links as the addressee and by extension the reader to think beyond the present moment and imagine the future. This is a time when the addressee will be old, grey, and sleepy. This future scene contrasts with the time of the poem's writing, which the reader learns more about from line 3 onwards. In line 2, the poem starts to reveal its speaker's agenda. The speaker offers the addressee an instruction for this far off future moment. Take down this book. The preceding keep up the sleepy atmosphere. It is not immediately obvious which book the speaker is referring to, but as the mode of communication here, the book, the poem of the book itself is a form of literature. It could well mean the book in which this poem is collected. This interpretation would support the idea that this poem is, on at least one level, about the complicated relationship between Yeats himself and his muse, Montgomery. Regardless, the speaker feels that his specific book will, in the future, tell the addressee something about her life, particularly with regard to the contrast between the poem's present and the future it projects. How many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. In this stanza, the speaker continues to ask the woman to think about herself when she is old and nodding off by the fire. But now he wants her to imagine herself old, but thinking back upon her earlier years. This is an interesting mindset to be thinking of herself as old, but remembering herself as she is in the present. He asks her to think about the many people who loved her moments of glad grace. The speaker then asks her to imagine herself as an old woman, thinking about her past lovers who loved her beauty with a love false or true. Then he makes a clear distinction between himself and all the others who have ever claimed to love her. He says, "But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you." This man he refers to is himself. He asks her to remember when she is old that one person, namely himself, loved the soul within her. He loved her for more than her beauty and her fame. He loved who she was deep inside. He then claims that he would have loved her even as her beauty faded. He would have loved her sorrows of changing face. He vows to this woman that had she returned his love, he would have loved everything about her, even the way her face would age and changing with time. You will then remember that many men then loved you because of your joyful beauty. They loved you for your beauty, some with a true love, others safely. But then you will also remember that one man loved your soul and loved you for the sadness of your looks. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead, and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. With this stanza, the speaker reminds the woman that she is imagining herself as an old woman. The description of her bending down beside the glowing bars reminds the reader that she is picturizing herself as an old woman sitting by the fire, reading a book written by the speaker. In the next line, the speaker describes the woman he speaks to as lettering out a small, sad murmur. She is sad because of how love fled. This is the first hint that the speaker love has left. His love has been left unrequited, and so he has fled and paced upon the mountains overhead. Finally, after continual rejection, love hid his face amid a crowd of stars. Thus, the speaker is proclaiming to the woman he loved that her rejection of him has sent him running to the mountains. He claims that he has hid his face. The speaker wants his woman to regret losing him when she is old and her beauty has faded. He believes that when she is old, she will truly regret having lost the one person who loved her soul. Thus, he is trying to get her to picture herself as an old woman before she actually gets there. If she does, perhaps there is a chance that she may change her mind and decide to return the love of the one man who loved her soul and whose love will not fade as her beauty fades with age. Then, as you bend down near the glowing fire in the grate, you will murmur to yourself that love has left you and has hidden itself far away in lofty mountains and in starry skies. The poem presents a portrait of decaying and dying youth and beauty. The poet has referred to it time and again quite passionately all through his poetic career. Morgane, his beloved, was a proud and headstrong girl. The poem sounds a note of warning to her. The idea is that if she does not reciprocate his love, which is not merely physical but spiritual too, she would have to repent for her folly in her old age. Her youth and beauty would wither and vanish one day, and lovers who loved her physical beauty and around her, lured by her bloom, would desert her one day by one. Then she would smart with a sense of remorseful agony of the cruelty and callousness towards the poet. The poet intends for warm her. The last line, and hid his face amid a crowd of stars, contains very beautiful imagery as the reader imagines love hiding between the stars in the heavens. The poet seemed to be telling his lover that while his love for her will always remain, she will be unable to reach it as one is unable to reach into the heavens and pluck out a star. The tone of the poem changes with the stanza of the last one. While the first two stanzas could be seen as romantic and positive, the loss of speaker's love in the third stanza drastically changes the tone, which has become full of regret.